Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Death by Adaptation podcast, a bi weekly book club where we choose one classic book and compare and contrast it against its cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolò Grasso, and today I'm joined by a very, very good friend of mine and fellow film critic, Rafael Felix. How are you doing, Rafael?
I'm really doing poorly, but I'm really happy to be here, and it's my first experience talking about books in recording ways. Would be an interesting experience, I would say.
Yeah. You shouldn't worry. As I always say, this is new for all of us. This is still new for me, even after a year and a half of doing this podcast, which is kind of crazy when I think about it.
Yeah,
But it's the end of February. We've just gone through a wonderful, wonderful episode talking about Twilight in celebration of Valentine's Day. Some would say the most romantic book out there. Wonderful, wonderful, amazing. I love this yearly celebration. We did 50 Shades of Grey the previous year, which was equally as as interesting a conversation.
my condolences to you and your fellows.
Thank you. But I decided to kind of, pivot to something that's still kind of in the same realm, relationships, female characters, female protagonists who have a big burden on their shoulders, but something that's more serious, something that's more important, I'd say, than anything that poor Bella Swan goes through in Twilight. Because today we're talking about Annie Ernaux's L'Evénement, aka Happening, which was turned in 2021 into a film by Audrey Diwan.
Bon, et alors, les études?
Elle va bientôt avoir son diplôme avec mention.
Ça va, hein, fais pas la modeste. On le sait bien que t'es doué.
J'ai tellement peur de pas réussir aux examens.
Si j'ai pas la moyenne, l'année prochaine, je suis sur un tracteur.
Bah,
J'ai l'esprit ailleurs.
et on sait où?
Mais qu'est-ce que t'as? T'es pâle comme tout. Tu vas pas nous faire une maladie maintenant?
Vous êtes enceinte, mademoiselle. Je suis désolé.
C'est pas possible.
It's kind of hard to start talking about
Yeah.
L'Evénement because where do you start? This book was written in the year 2000 by Annie Ernaux, and it's one of those rare non-fiction books that we talk about on this podcast. Annie Ernaux is a French writer, one of the more important ones. Recently, she won a Nobel Prize for writing, and rightfully so, because I'm not as familiar with her other books as you are, probably, because I think you've read another one of her books,
I've
right?
read Lizanne's. Yeah,
Listen, and she is fantastic, truly one of the revolutionary writers of France. She is been writing since the late 60s, early 70s, on and off again. But L'Evénement, which she wrote in 2000, is about her personal experience with abortion, because in the early 60s in France abortion was illegal, and unfortunately she ended up being pregnant. And she was like, well, I'm studying, I'm in school, I want to continue going to university, which is not a given at the time, especially from a woman coming from a working class background. And she's like, you know what, I don't want this is literally coming at the worst possible time in my life. And everyone around her tells her, no, don't do this, because you'll get in trouble, you might lose your life, you might lose your freedom, because you'll go to jail, and everyone who supports you will go to jail with you. But she is strong, brave, and she's like, well, I'm gonna find a way to do this. And so in this book, which is very short, I want to say probably the shortest non-short story that we've talked about, this is a novella, barely 100 pages long. She packs in every little detail, both personal and historic, of what she went through with this experience. Raphael, what are your thoughts on Annie Ernaux's L'Evénement, or Happening?
I love this book. I came from a recent experience of reading the other book, and it was quite a shock to me at first. The style of writing, it's very sparse, but it's super intimate at the same time. The fact that she splits pretty much all the book in distinct paragraphs that go between thoughts and ideas and moments with such fluidity. I would say it's super intimate. Um, and especially when you look at this, and there are some paragraphs, especially going through to the later part of the book, where
Hmm.
you have the moments where she actually talks about the experience of writing the book. It just adds a bit more to not only to her process, but how she looks 40 years later, to a world that right now feels ancient. She even says it herself, both in this book and the other one that I can't say the name because I'm terrible at French, but you can say.
Les années.
um, yes,
The years.
exactly. Which is yes, I'll say the name in English. The Years is also an amazing book. So yeah, it's such an intimate experience, quite a different experience from the film, I would say. But it's such an intimate and sometimes heartbreaking, but really practical. She writes in such practical terms sometimes. It's such a cold way to write some stuff that it sometimes that coldness turns into actually poetry and true
Mm.
beauty. I really really love this book. Really really loved it.
Yeah, I completely agree. This was actually my second time reading this book because I remember in late 2021, after this, after the film adaptation won the Golden Lion at Venice, it was actually bought in my local library. And I was like, yeah, let's get it. And so I read it together with my mother and sister, and I was blown away because of exactly what you said. It's so short and brief. She wastes no time. Every single paragraph in this book feels like it's saying something profound in one way or the other. And there's one thing that you said especially about this, that it's so cold, it's so calculated. I was like, like some people might I think in someone else's writing, be it fiction or non-fiction, it could be seen as, maybe a bit distasteful as well. But there is one part in here where she talks about, I was trying to find ways on how this would work, and how even, like, how would you get an abortion and stuff, and I go to medical books and there's nothing written in that, and there's no details whatsoever, and it's all just about, the legalities of it and why you shouldn't do it, but there's no actual, like, proper descriptions and ways to document yourself. And so I think, in a way, she's creating a proper capsule of what it was back then to actually go through something like this. And so she does kind of alternate these more poetic reflections on herself, with the procedural almost elements of
Yes.
what it's like to go through all of this. And it gets dark, and it gets a bit scary as well, but also becomes very beautiful. And that's actually something that I really appreciated that you said, that rereading the book, I was like, man, this is really does add that extra something that truly makes it borderline a masterpiece, I'd say, a must read even, is the fact that it's all written 40 years down the line, and there's so much self-reflection from Ernaux, which kind of makes me go into the other reason that I found this book very interesting to talk about, which is, holy shit, this is still relevant in ways that it shouldn't be. And it really moves me. I don't know how you feel about that, but just when she's talking about, I live in a world where these things can happen now a bit more freely. And there's this hopefulness and light in the final pages of this book that's almost, I don't want to say it feels absent, because thankfully we're not in 1963. Thankfully times have actually changed, but there are people who want to, you know drag us back.
Yes.
Which is very upsetting. Even just recently, it was a crazy coincidence that in January, some members of the Italian parliament and politicians, including female ones, have been trying to push, anti-abortion laws again. And it's just, why are we still doing this in 2023?
Yeah, we and like a few weeks ago too, in Spain they tried to do some, I would say, emotional violence towards women that try to take abortions.
Oh.
When you yeah they're trying to implement an idea that is almost imported from the States, where you need to listen to the heartbeat of the baby before
Oh.
you yeah. So yeah, this is not a problem from the past, as we've seen from the what has been like the last 2 years in Supreme Court of the United States of America. So
Mm.
yeah, it's problematic. And when you look at how Ernaux in 2000 wrote about this, and how she reflects, and she does the same in the years in a different way, I would say, because both her books are a lot about her just jiggling her own memory and how she looks at stuff from 40 or 60 years 50 years in the years. And there's a difference in the reflection that she does in 2000, and a difference she did in the how she looked at the same experience in '09 when she did the years, where she also
Mm.
mentions the abortion from the 60s quite a bit. It's a major point in the book too. um, and there's not as much optimism as there
Mm.
is in the happening. um, and it's almost scary to a degree when you especially when you read both books and you see how her optimism just shrunk just a tiny bit
Mm.
in the way she writes between those books that are actually torn apart in like 10 years, I would say. So yeah, it's still amazingly relevant, both the book and the film. um, and they both give a completely different experience, but I would even I wouldn't say that they actually complement each other, but I
Mm.
think they both give interesting insights about this problem, not only in the 60s but right now.
Yeah, especially in terms of just the way that she writes it, it's entirely in first person, and you get to fully immerse yourself in what she was feeling and how she was feeling about everything surrounding her. And I think the most impressive thing, at least for me, was again similar to how she actually writes the book. Like, she wastes no time. She's like, okay, this is happening, and I'm gonna take action, and I'm gonna try to find a solution as soon as possible, because there's almost this ticking clock element that you can feel.
Yes.
um, and it's so frustrating, and you can feel the not so much rage but disappointment, I'd say, that she has towards the people around her, uh, especially, the let's call him boyfriend, kind of the one who actually got her pregnant, who's completely, dismissive. He separates himself from her. It's like, it's your problem now. Another friend of hers kind of tries to take advantage of the situation in a very uncomfortable way. Her actual friends, girlfriends, again, separate themselves from her because there's the risk of actually going to jail if they help her out. And it's, I mean, I cannot even imagine what it must have been like to go through all of that, keeping it secret from your parents, trying to hide, the belly that's slowly starting to grow, because the whole experience lasted 3 months. It was 12 weeks, more or less, before she actually, managed to get the abortion. And even then, it was a perilous journey. There's the entire sequence when she actually goes to this woman. How did you find that, the way she just puts it into words? Again, it kind of goes into that clinical,
Yeah.
cold, kind of detached. Um,
It's a tough reading. It's
mm,
honestly, when you get to the last like 20 pages, 20, 30 pages, it gets really heart wrenching to a degree. Um, yes, it's mostly because, as I said before, the way actually she is looking at what she's writing at that moment, and you get to see that when she actually writes about it in those sparse paragraphs where she's commenting on her own writing, and where she's struggling to understand if she should just write like this and be as cold as it is about the procedure itself and how it hurts and where everything went and how she felt. It's but yeah, you really need that coldness gives not only bravery to the book, but it actually makes the experience so palpable that
Mm.
it actually might change minds. I don't think I think actually that Ernaux did the book, and she writes it herself once again in the in between pages, that she wants to turn what happened to her in writing, and she wants her writing to turn into an happening too. And I think that is the actual goal of writing: the procedures, the abortion, even the abortion itself when it happens, where the expression just really left me cold a bit when she's actually writing. Like, I don't know how we did you read it in English, in French, in
I read it the
Italian?
first time in Italian, and the
Yes.
second time I got a French copy with a lot of with a lot of help from a dictionary.
Okay, so yeah, there's the moment where she actually gets the abortion, the
Mhm.
moment where she goes to the toilet. The word she uses is, in translation to English, is I need to shit. um, and that really got me like, oh wow, this is actually happening, and it's such in a crude way. It's like she's writing from the point of view of the person she was at the exact moment she felt like she needed to actually
Mhm.
go, and not just like she did in other parts of the book where she writes in a more detached way. That moment, the language she used, it's so personal, it's so cold and almost dirty to a degree. It really shook me. It really shook me. Those last 30 pages are, you can't stop reading actually, because the way that the paragraphs work, and you just they're like brief moments in time. They can be 4 years, 3 months, they can be 10 minutes, but
Mhm.
those paragraphs encapsulate such a moment and a feeling and a story in itself, that you can't just stop reading, and you have no idea what you're going to get next. And especially when you're going through those harsher moments, you're just looking for what she's feeling next. And what's interesting is that sometimes it's really not that what you get. You get something that she's feeling in a completely different time. But when you get to the abortion, it's just that, and it's so focused and it's so poignant
Mhm.
that it's harsh, I would say.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially the fact that that's always one of the things. You even mentioned it earlier. With the woman who's forced to actually listen to the heartbeat
Yeah.
of the fetus. It's that's the what's the name? It's the pro-life. That's the pro-life
Yep.
movement. That every as long as if it's there, it's already a child. You're killing the infant. All of these
Yeah.
very graphic imagery that's forced down your throat can actually completely change a person's perspective on abortion in a negative way, I believe. Because I do think, just in general, like, that's just human decency. Just leave people the choice. No one's forced to do anything. If you want to keep a child, keep it. Don't force other people who cannot afford it to risk losing their lives. Well, would have so many problems. Just go through it. And I think the way Annie Ernaux actually writes it, especially especially the part that you mentioned, like when she actually has to. I don't remember the actual term, how it was used in French and in Italian, but yeah, it's similar. Like, you feel like you have to, purge yourself almost. I think that's so important, because if she was still trying to give it, to all of this, some semblance of humanity, you could say, to
Yeah.
the fetus, I mean, and all of that, you'd risk going into the very dangerous territory that something like last year's Blonde went into, which, despite being a movie that I enjoyed, there's undeniably very questionable choices in there that make you go like, what the fuck are you doing here? Oh no, oh no. And even in the book, those elements are present in a way that's more tactful, but it still can make you turn out, I don't fully agree with what you're doing. I can get it, but I don't agree. And so, to have something as stark and just real as this hits you like a sledgehammer, and she doesn't get lost in any graphic detail as well, which is well, like she describes what needs to be described. She doesn't lose herself into gratuity. It's like, yeah,
Yes.
this is what happened, and she literally, I just moved on. I managed to, ended up in the hospital. Thankfully, they said it was just a miscarriage, and whew, I'm done. I'm safe, and I managed to live my life. She says it as well. Like she was like, yeah, I ended up having children, ended up having a proper life, and it just wasn't the right time. That's that's I think what is key, absolutely key to this book for me is the way she enforces it. Like, if I'd done this, I would have hated this child. If I wouldn't have had the love that I actually end up having for my children. I wouldn't be the woman that I am today. And it made me reflect so hard on some people that I know that ended up being having emergency pregnancies. Let's say it's just like, well, I guess that's it. And their life completely changed from night to day. And all of the dreams. I'm gonna go have a master's abroad, and I'm hoping to move to the Netherlands because that's where I'd like to dream. It's like, nope. 5 years later, she's just stuck now with two children in a very very small town, and it's heartbreaking. And so you also understand that it's not an easy choice at all. And I think that's why a story like this is so important, so important to tell, to share. And thank you, Anir. No, it's a given at this point, but just thank you for doing this. I don't even know how to say it in a nicer
Yeah.
way. um but yeah, I
There
don't
is
know if.
also something especially about this book, that I didn't find in the film. I understand why I didn't find it in the film, though. But what she managed to do, both in the years and in this, is that she creates a collective character. It's a lot of times in the book, in those final pages, just reflects on it. She actually talks about how she felt that every woman that went through that made part of her journey.
Mhm,
Um, and it's something so beautiful to watch, because the point of view where she writes, she he's constantly describing other people that are around us. She's completely aware of her surroundings. But not only that, the same places where she goes, they have memory, and she keeps evocating that memory. The
mhm.
final moments of the book where she reflects on the people that went through that bedroom, even
Yeah.
herself, before she gets into the office, or the moment where she actually looks at, I don't know if it was the actual door or the even the stairs, but how many
Mhm,
women have stepped on these steps, and how many will come before me, and how are they part of my journey. Um, she just has a beautiful way of evocating memory and turning herself into part of something bigger, but never in, like, I would say, a martyr or a pretentious way, like I'm a
mhm.
symbol or something. No, she feels part of many, and that is completely captured in the book. And there's also something that I keep asking myself, and I actually want to ask you this question.
Yeah.
What do you feel is the happening itself? Is it the abortion, or is it the pregnancy? Because I kept feeling that it was actually the pregnancy. When I before I started the book, I had the idea that the happening itself would be the abortion. But
Mhm,
as I was writing it, she has a moment where she actually says that she can't even write the word pregnant, because
mhm,
she can't name it, because it will make it real. And the
mhm,
way that she avoids that word, and it actually, the book itself, it's called The Happening, something that she cannot name. um, I think if it is the pregnancy that is the happening, I think it's even more powerful, because uh, she's not making something out of the abortion.
mhm,
She's making something out of a forced pregnancy. Um, and that it gives her agency, it gives the journey a different meaning, and it gives the actual abortion a different meaning too. It's like it's not the thing in itself, it's what makes you move on. uh, and I
Yes.
think that's an interesting discussion to have.
Yeah, it's actually something that I did find interesting, considering the English translation, because they do call it happening, and probably that's the same way that they translate it in the book whenever she uses the word evenement. But I find it interesting because in Italian it translates to the event more so than the
Mhm.
happening, which is closer to, I think, maybe even the Portuguese
The
uh,
Portuguese is actually
title.
the happening, o acontecimento. So it has the
Okay, yeah.
prefix. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting reading. I do fall close to you. I do think it's probably the actual concept, not the conception, but yeah, because that's in a narrative sense, you could even say it's the inciting incident. It's like, whoops, she's pregnant. What now?
Yeah.
What's going to happen next? But it even moves, I think, with the way that she just structures the book, as we've said, that it's these very brief paragraphs that can cover very brief or very long periods of time. Those end up being smaller happenings, smaller events in their own right, and all of those hold some kind of significance, I think, to her. And that's kind of the beauty of this whole book. It's something that I've said many times before. I don't even know if on this podcast, but just in life in general. A story that becomes so personal, so intimate, with so many details that are 100% a person's lived in experience, it ends up feeling way more universal than if she were trying to, I don't know, make it, if she were actually trying to make it more universal, or if she set out to write a fiction story, maybe. Um, there's so many parts where you can just kind of see yourself even, which is, I maybe ironic coming from a cis man, but it is like there are even the ways that she talks about and discusses, when she's at parties and she's fully aware of how the situation is there. She's like, women have desires and men have desires, but there's no actual way of actually doing anything, having any kind of relationship, because it might fuck you up. And even later on, there's this other moment where she goes to church. She talks about, like, yeah, after the abortion and everything, I decided to go to church and kind of confess what I did. And she regrets it instantly. She's like, why did I do this? And kind of kills her whole hope and belief in religion, which I found to be, which again is something that I find very personal. I was like, yeah, there are moments where you kind of look at who you are and how you just see the world, and knowing that there are some people that will not accept it. It kind of kills part of you, but also you have to be strong enough to move forward. And there's all these little moments in there that are just so beautiful, so touching. Uh, it's all those little happenings, you could say. Um, yes. Speaking of happenings, uh, this is as good a time as any to fully transition into talking about the film as well. Happening, which premiered at the 2021 Venice Film Festival, where it actually won the prestigious Golden Lion achievement, and not just the Golden Lion achievement. It won unanimously. So every single member of the jury was like, "This is the best film of the competition." And the both of us were actually very lucky to be there at Venice Film Festival that year. I don't think you saw it though at the
Yes, which is
screening.
amazing because I've
It's
watched most of the films from competition, and then one of the few that I didn't actually won, which was something amazing. That festival
it's,
had really an amazing lineup. That
it
has
was
to be
stacked.
said. So winning this, being the film that won, it's made it something, especially with Bong Joon Ho in the jury.
That was unexpected.
Yes.
I remember seeing the actual closing ceremony in this big screening room at the festival, and people were not happy. Like, you could tell, few select here and there were like, "Yes, oh yeah, Annie Ernaux, go! We love her and we love Audrey Diwan and all that." But most people were upset because it's, in a competition that had bigger American names, or more, I hate to use that term, but it's the only one that's coming to mind, more cinematic films. Oh my, there's the musical sequences, and there's the action, and there's the thrills, and the big loud acting. Like there's the full package. Levinemont ended up winning, and 100% it was a political choice, because of course there's always a level of politics when it comes to awards decisions. But I also think it was the right award to give. And this kind of makes me upset, which is kind of what I want to talk about first and foremost, that you know a prestigious film festival like Venice can be used to push certain films. So it's like, yes, we're gonna take this movie that's based on a true story about an abortion. It's very grounded, it's very real, it's very raw. We're gonna put it out into the world because everyone's gonna want to screen the Golden Lion winner, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Happening got very poor push, very poor distribution. No one really wanted to pick it up, probably because of the subject matter. It didn't end up going pretty much anywhere. A couple of awards here and there afterwards, primarily in France and a couple smaller festivals. But many were hoping it would be considered for the international competition in France. Both, I think it was eligible maybe for 2022, but it wasn't chosen, and neither in 2021. I think it was Titan's year as a pick, which also was not nominated. But yes, I'm curious. First of all, how do you feel about this film, and how do you feel about the way it's not been seen, pretty much outside of very select few
Yeah.
cinephiles?
Yeah, this was screened in Portugal not an insane amount of times. It was actually done with some other stuff based on other Annie Ernaux books. It was like a Simple Passion or something. They made like a double feature with it, and there was some people that went to talk about abortion in those screenings. It is an interesting experience.
Yeah.
I've actually watched like much later in a screening that was just focused on it because the film had like a 3 weeks rotation, and I would say that it's for many reasons. First of them, it's from almost an unknown director in a film that wasn't completely unanimous. And when everyone was talking about Venice that year, they were talking about, even if they weren't in competition, they were talking about Last Night in Soho,
Mhm.
June, Spencer. I would say a lot. There was amazing cinema in Venice that year, and yeah, that win came a bit out of nowhere. It was nothing like bizarre and shocking like Titan, for example. That I
Mhm.
still think it's a masterpiece. I love that film to bits. Um, but it's not something that people would actually think about like it's being something absurd, like I need to go and watch it. No, it was something that is a really intimate story. It's a really tough watch to uh, it has a character that it's a loner, and the film is a very lonely thing, and
Mm.
gonna talk about it a bit after this. But yeah, I think it's because I don't know if there's something to be said about not only she's being an unknown director, but also a woman. I don't know if that is actually something. Both of those together might have been quite a big problem. I would say too that even if now I know one year no, but before all of this, I didn't.
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh,
I, ju-
same.
I just got to her after she won her Nobel Prize, and I was like, okay, yeah, it matched the time where I was trying to get back into reading. So yeah, let me try this, and it was actually amazing. But yeah, so it's not particularly known writer, I would say, out of the reading circle. I would say the director is not well known. There's no familiar faces in the
Mhm.
cast as well. Uh, yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and of course, as you said, but I think that goes without saying, the subject matter. It's not an amazingly popular, and it's easy to show a film like this, for example, in Lisbon, or maybe in Porto, another big city in Portugal. But you get this film to more rural areas, I would say, and
Mhm.
there wouldn't be a single bum in that house. So yeah, there's a lot, but I think it says a lot about the film itself, and I think it says something good, and says also something quite bad about ourselves.
Yeah, it's not a good look for society at large in this sense. I remember watching this film, knowing nothing about it. I legit went to the first screening. It was like, I don't know the story, I don't know the director. The buzz, there was a little bit of buzz of like, oh yeah, this is a good one, you should watch it. So that's the only reason why I went. I think it was even like a 10 p.m. screen. It was late.
Yeah,
It was
it
very
was. I,
late.
I actually remember that.
There you go. And surprisingly enough, even though it was very late and they usually fall asleep at those types of screenings, um, I was hooked. I was very much into it. I didn't love the film, but I was taken aback by the style of it all. I think you said it perfectly. Like, this is about a lonely woman. It's a lonely film about a lonely woman who's constantly isolated by people around her, and that comes instantly clear as soon as the film starts because it's in 4:3, this boxed aspect ratio, and it's shot, I want to say, entirely with one lens, a 50 millimeter lens, I believe, because it's so tight. It's not excessively claustrophobic, but it's very hard to see other people in the frame. It's very hard to have a wide shot in this film. It's all tight on Annie, the protagonist, who's, let's say, kind of a slightly fictionalized version of Ernaux herself because she's given a secondary name that's not hers. She's called
Shen.
Duchesne, Anne Duchesne, and I was genuinely shocked at some points in the film, primarily for just how, and this kind of ties with the book as well, just how straightforward it is and no nonsense. Whenever there are parts about, when she goes to the doctor and she's like, I want to do something about this, help me out. I don't want this baby. Help me out, please. To when she actually tries to have an abortion herself with knitting needles, which is rough.
Rough.
It's graphic. Again, it's graphic, but not gratuitous. It's almost explicit, but she hides enough to maintain, um, to respect more so. Let's not even maintain, but just respect the protagonist and the actual real life story. I think it's executed beautifully, and it hit me really, really hard on rewatch. Um, Especially after having reread the book, there's so much that I love about this film, um, and I do believe the other element that didn't help this movie when it came out, which actually kind of disappointed me, especially from some critics, because it did have a good support, critics wise. They were like, "Yeah, this is amazing." A lot of them said this is our golden lion, and they were uh, very happy when it actually won it. But the most surprising thing was that a lot of people didn't like it because they ended up comparing it to other films about abortion. And I think the two that are kind of the main uh, movies you could say about that topic in the last couple of decades are 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days by Christian Mungiu, a Romanian film, and then you have Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always from the US, which came out just the year before during the pandemic. Again, another movie that had a very unfortunate release, but it was more widely seen. And while I can kind of see the comparisons, I did find it kind of, I don't want to say upsetting, but also, yes, upsetting that there was a very um, dismissive way of approaching this film happening because of the comparisons to these other two films, especially Munju's movie, because it's more it's I don't know, it's the critics' favorite, maybe we could say. And I know you love both of those movies, and rightfully so. I love them too. But do you feel maybe how do you feel about the way that Audrey Diwan actually portrays all of this? Because to me, it feels very personal, which is kind of lacking from I know like Munju's more detached style, but it falls closer to Never, Rarely, and
Yes.
Eliza's
Yeah,
directing.
I would say that I think that there is a loneliness too, never rarely, sometimes always,
Mm,
that I think we can easily find in happening. Uh, I think that Christian Mungiu's film is more political
mm,
than this one, which is interesting because I think the book is a lot more political than it is this film. The Annie Ernaux, the Annie Ernaux book and the film itself,
yeah.
and I would say that is one of the main differences, because when we look at how Ernaux's writing is a lot focused on that specific moment in the 60s, how they feel, what they are. And I mean, maybe I do have more of this experience because I've read The Years, that is much more of a collective story that talks about a lot about this period of the 60s and her experience with abortion too. But it actually manages to make her experience much more collective than, for example, you can see in The Happening. But I would say that the film itself, it keeps the intimacy. As you said, the camera is never claustrophobic, but you're really close to her
Mm.
face. You feel everything that she's feeling, and when the moment comes in the final 10 minutes, most of what you see and what your despair comes from her face, from the pain she's feeling, from the groans, for her lack of breath, how she's sweating
Oof.
when she's sat on the sink, and she's just and on the toilet, sorry, and she's trying to. She doesn't want to look down, and the camera just slowly follows her and goes back up so quickly
Mm.
because she's actually afraid to look at it. Then has as the book, it's really cold, but it's never gratuitous, and there is not a moment of fat in it. Every shot, especially in these moments, every shot counts everywhere. There's no gratuitous nudity. This film has a lot of
Mm.
nudity, and it should have, because it's something that it actually touches a lot about the power of the female body, and your agency towards it, and how she actually wants to take her own body. And there is one moment, and I am sorry if this was something that you're going to talk about later, but I think
I go for it. Yeah.
it really focuses something that you said there. There is a moment in this film that completely broke me, and it's something that is just mentioned in such a cold and dismissive way in the book, that it really just shook me now that I've watched the film again after reading the book, and see how that moment was really amplified. It's the moment where she goes to the doctor, and she says that, yeah, I took shots, and he asks what shots. And then the doctor tells her that he gives it stradiol, I think that's the name, that just ensnares the fetus
The
in her
embryo.
womb. Yeah, and the face she does, the way she looks, it's it was a moment of rape. It was a moment of
Mm.
sexual violence coming towards her, and the child, the fetuses, I'm sorry, that she carries in her, it was not a result of rape, but from that point on, it was. And I think the film, also the book, but in the book it's such a short passage. It's something like she's telling it in such a natural way. It's like, yeah, she gave me, the doctor gave me this, I didn't know. But in the film, when you actually see a reaction to it, and the shock in her face, and even the doctors, but the shock in her face, it's a moment of sexual violence, and that this film touches in this way, that I didn't find in a book, and it
Hmm.
was an amazing and heart-wrenching moment.
Yeah. This is a good moment to give a shout out to the main actress, Anamaria Vartolomei.
Yes,
Oh, oh,
what an amazing performance. She's
Jesus. Yeah.
amazing.
Uh, like you just said, there's so many moments in here that you read about in the book that are
Yeah,
described in and probably it is the fact that it is kind of a retrospective. She's just looking back on what happened in an almost objective way, kind of detaching herself from the narrative to kind of give it an honest portrayal. This is what Annie Ernaux does, while still adding some the personal emotions that she went through, and some poetic flourishes here and there. But to see it just in the film, all those little moments, and that was I remember watching it the first time, especially. I was like, fuck. It's 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 upsetting.
yes,
It's very upsetting. And that was the moment when I was rewatching it as well, where I was like, this is one of the key moments why I genuinely think the book, but also the film, should be shown in schools.
yeah,
maybe even to just everyone with a capital E, just force watch them, force them to watch the movie, because I would be shocked if anyone can see this film, watch this experience, and maybe you could say I don't really agree with abortion. She shouldn't be doing that, but I think you get sucked into the narrative a little bit. You start kind of rooting for her. I can see some people be like, man, but, it's a movie, it's a story. Let's see where it goes. If you get to that point and you're not shocked, if you're not angry at what the doctor did, I think you have no soul. Just
Yeah.
straight up, you're soulless. And there are so many parts in this book that feel like slaps in this film, sorry, that just seeing them portrayed in such a grounded way, such realistic way, it's just such a slap in the face. There's so many parts that just anger me. And I think the two that one that angers me the most is when, and she kind of confides herself with one of her classmates, one of her, let's call him a friend, quote unquote a friend. And he's like, yeah, this is what's happened. You know a lot of girls. Maybe you know someone who's actually tried to get an abortion, uh, and he kind of decides to help her out, and he invites her to dinner at home. And again, this is a part that's present in the book, but the way that you see it in the film, that's also borderline rape. Like it's sexual assault almost. It's like, oh, you already have a child, so it's nothing's bad's gonna happen from this if we have sex, which is disgusting. You can get to like, oh yeah, that's everything that was going into your mind. Is like, oh yeah, maybe I can get something out of this. Uh, and the other part that's a bit upsetting, but just sad, and especially on rewatch, that's where I kind of switched my opinions around a little bit. Is when she tells what's happening to her friends, and there's this very interesting moment earlier on in the film where one of the girls says, I would never have sex. I kind of tease, I kind of flirt, but I couldn't do it because it would actually ruin my life. But she kind of experiments with self pleasure a lot. And there's this very intimate moment with the three girls together, which feels almost voyeuristic. Like, I shouldn't be watching this, but it's showing you just the extent of, you have to find ways to kind of placate your desire if you don't want to mess up. And unfortunately, Anne, quote unquote, messes up, and it's not on her. I mean, that's also the other thing. It's she's never criticized for what she did, and that's kind of the, I think, key to the whole movie to make it work. You never feel like, oh well, this is on you. Why did you do this, girl? Like, and that's amazing. That's so beautiful. But when she talks to the girls, and you see the blonde friend especially, who's instantly like, nope, nope, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna
Instantly. Yeah.
instantly. Oh, it's a switch.
Completely.
And the first time again, I was like, fuck you, girl. But then you understand. It's like, well, you get where she's coming from. You've seen her, how she acts throughout the entire film. And you also don't really blame her. And they like that the film doesn't blame her. Because that's what a lot of people did
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
It's, but also you have the other girl who kind of tries to be supportive. But yeah, no, there's so many small moments like this in the film that hit you like a freight train. Just
Yeah.
oh.
That exchange. Actually, you mentioned. I would actually talk about that first. You mentioned the situation where she goes to the guy's house,
Mhm.
and that is a moment where he says, "Yeah, but you're already pregnant. There's no problem." And there's two things in that scene that really shook me. The first one is the look that she gives to him
Oh.
on the door. She does a look to the camera, and it encapsulates what the book says, because the book, Ernaux herself says, yeah, this is kind of fucked up, but I
Mhm.
kind of understand where he's coming from. Yeah, he's right. He just wants pleasure, and it's easy pleasure. And in that performance, when she looks at him, I don't see just disgust. I see kind of a moment where she actually thinks about it practically, and it's like, yeah, maybe you're right. And she just storms off. But there is a practicality to the moment, or to the way she interprets what he says, that it doesn't even demonize what he's saying, which is really weird. It's really fucked up what he says, but the film itself doesn't tell you that. Even the main character, as disgusted that she is, she looks at him almost like understanding in a
Hmm.
practical way what he's saying. But I think that scene is fucked up before that, because the whole conversation they have on the table where he's sexualizing the experience of her getting pregnant and trying
All the
to,
details.
yes,
Oh.
trying to make his experience his,
Hmm.
and to take pleasure out of her misery and out of that moment that might have just destroyed her completely, her life. That moment, yes, was insanely disgusting. And there is a moment in this film, and I'm not only just now realizing where do I know that face, because I spent the 2 times I watched the film trying to understand who that Elaine's actress was, and now it
Yeah.
clicked to me. It's the girl from Portrait of a Lady on Fire, also pregnant in Portrait of a Lady on Fire,
Ah,
and
I didn't
and
check. You're
I'm
right.
pretty sure she's the one that gets the abortion. I'm pretty sure.
She is.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So there is also another element
Oh.
to this film. But those two have one moment in this film that I think just gives you a lot of that collective memory that Ernaux gets in her book, with when it's a moment when she says, "I did a lot of times. I just wasn't as lucky as you weren't just as lucky as me." um, and at that moment, that is the only moment in this film where this character actually has any sympathy
Hmm.
from someone, and it's actually really really beautiful. um, there is also the moment where she hugs her mom, and it's like a long hug, and her mom just understands that something is wrong. And it's such a beautiful and heart-wrenching moment, once again, of unknown female solidarity. Mm,
Hmm.
and Arnaud has a really beautiful way of writing about her parents, both in the years and not as much in the happening, but when it's there, it's quite interesting. But the way she puts her family there in that moment where she just listens to music with them and they're just bickering with each other and laughing. She's almost like looking at what she has and she doesn't want that destroyed, and that
Hmm.
almost gives her more motivation to just move on. And when she has that appointment at the doctor, and she says, "I want a child, but I not instead of a life." That line is amazing. And yeah, there's a lot of beauty in this film. I would say that the feeling of it is much different than the book. um
Yes.
I think the book is, it feels more collective, and this film feels really lonely and just an agency journey of a woman trying to get control uh, of her body. Um,
Hmm. It almost felt like which I do want to believe it was entirely intentional. It does feel like it's almost framed as a thriller of sorts. Uh,
Sometimes, yeah.
there's the use of music that really stuck with me the second time around, where it's just this string and this like piano notes. They're very discordant with each other, and there's this dissonance that it's a bit scary even at times. And this music kind of evolves throughout the film, and it becomes more and more prevalent, and it becomes louder, and it becomes almost a full-blown orchestra until you actually have this explosion of music towards the end, um, where it really hits you in the feels. And that is also when I realized, like, there might have been so many more flashy movies 2021 that deserved attention. But this is still inherently cinematic in the way it is put together. Uh, and it is unfair to compare it to some other films. But even just comparing it to the book, like you said in the beginning in your opening statement, you're completely right. It doesn't necessarily complement the book, but they do kind of walk the same path, one at a different time from the other. The book gives you this very personal, very first person perspective of what happened, and the film is more, it is still very intimate, but it is more cold, just generally speaking, uh, which works in its favor. And it's and just speaking of coldness, I think the ending, the entire final part of the film, the way just shot and made. I forgot it's primarily long takes, and I cannot imagine choreographing the entire sequence in the house, um, with the I don't know how to call her, with the madam that helps Anne out. It's all one take, and it's painful, and it's a transaction. At the end of the day, it's a transaction. What they're doing, they're just, I'm paying you, and you're doing a service, and it does play very well into what Annie Ernaux writes in her book, because it's not trying to she's not trying to, like, to name the child that's growing inside her. She's not trying to think about it in any way that can humanize, can make it feel more personal and more also just harder to go through with the entire procedure. And the fact that it doesn't work the first time around and she has to go back, it is all present in the book, even when she ends up in the hospital, but it is written from someone who, survived it, of course, and it's 40 years later and she's kind of recounting these events. But actually seeing it in the film, it is anxiety inducing. And you start seeing her. You mentioned, like, all of the details of the sweat and just, she's going and she's struggling and nothing's happening and she's just checking and there's no blood and oh my god.
And the stoppage of music too, because the music stops at the moment she understands that she needs to. Yeah, so the music actually evolves as her pregnancy is. And it
Yes.
stops at the exact moment that her pregnancy stops too.
Which is a moment we mentioned it earlier, but I don't know why, but it felt way more graphic the first time around. Seeing it, I was like, oh my god, I cannot believe they actually showed it. Um,
It's so brief. Yeah,
it's
I
so
feel you.
brief.
Yeah, I feel you. When I've watched this film again, I was expecting to be. I was clenching more in the moments where I was looking at her face, more than the actual thing that was in the toilet or even the needle scene. I think the moment where I
Mm.
actually was aching more was when she was doing the procedure, and she was always like clenching her hips, like she's groaning and clenching and oh, that this time that was a moment that really got me, was the groans and the contractions of her hips and her legs when she's was doing the procedure. That was tough, but it's not, it doesn't linger. It's so brief, especially in the final shots. It's so brief.
Hmm. Yeah, and it all goes back to, why she did it in the end. And even in the film, I think it does kind of portray her dreams and her ambitions very well. Even when she goes back to her parents and the mom just slaps her when she's talking about, like, why do you care about my grades? It's like, fuck you. Like, I'm slaving away to support you so that you can actually go to school, study, actually do something that you would like in your life, something that was never given to her. It's a slap. It's a very strong physical act, but you understand perfectly where it's coming from, and it's like, yeah, the stakes are real. Um, and even the conversations that the conversations that she has with her professor, who kind of starts demeaning her, like, you just stop caring. Why should I help you out by giving you notes for class? Would you ever pull it off? It's I think it's very beautiful, especially, again, like you said. I didn't know what Year No was. I didn't even know going into the film that it was based on a true story. And so to actually watch it, to actually know what ended up happening to her, for her in her career, to actually become so successful and such an important female voice, it's wonderful. And it is a big shame that at the end of the day, this film is not as well known as probably it should be. Uh, Maybe it's the lack of English language as well. I don't know. I think something like Never
Doesn't
Rarely
help.
was easier to
Yes,
to
of
sell
course, it
to
it
markets.
doesn't help. But it's a shame because even especially when you look at the book, this was an incredibly hard adaptation to do because her
Mm,
books, the years, it's the exact same thing. they're sparse. There's no narrative there. It's just thoughts and it's just memories. There is actually no, yeah, this character is going from here to here. She's talking to this. She's saying this. There's nothing of that. Eh, The yeah, it's kind of a skeleton, but then Audrey Diwan, and I think it's called Machine Romano or something
Yes,
like that. Yeah,
the other
they truly
screenwriter.
had to give some narrative bones to it because the book itself doesn't have them. It's an intimate, and she's talking about her own experience, not as a character, but at herself and what she was thinking at the moment, and how
Hmm.
she's seeing herself looking at that moment. But this, it had to add dialogue, and the dialogue is always so beautiful, so poignant, so well written, so realistic. They you need to actually just give some credit to that, because nothing of that is on the book. And when you need to add dialogue and a character in actually to a book that doesn't have them, but at the same time is so personal and not compromising the feel of it, it
Hmm.
was an amazingly hard thing to pull off. And I think script wise, it's an amazing adaptation.
Yeah, beautifully put. It's this may be the first time where we're talking about a non-fiction book that was adapted into a fiction film, or at least something that's not a documentary per se, into a historical drama. Um, and it is a stellar work. Um, Even just the way they actually recreate 1963, it's not it doesn't draw too much attention to itself. I think
It's not
uh,
showy, I would say.
it's not showy.
It's very organic. It's very natural.
That's something that hit me because I watched the film with my parents, uh, and actually there's a moment of the needle that you mentioned earlier when she's actually injecting the supposedly helpful medicine. Into her leg, and it actually brought back memories into my mom. It was like, oh, I remember those needles. They were like these thick fucking needles in the 60s. So she was little. They were painful as hell, and you actually see that like it's not a nice syringe as you would have it nowadays. It's like you can actually see the needle very clearly, and it's this attention to detail that immerses you into the experience in a very strong way. And yeah, it's I, I'm just so happy I got to rewatch this film. I wanted to do it for the entirety of last year. I was like, 2022, I'm gonna find a way to rewatch Happening. It didn't happen, but finally I did it. And it was well worth it.
Yes, and it should come to a conclusion for us as yeah, you were more a filmmaker, I'm more a film critic, and there's something to be said about how this film wasn't pushed enough by some critics, and it
Oof.
should, because sometimes yeah, the films aren't just as seen as others, but the critics just help it a bit, and this film was, I think, wrongly dismissive because of other stuff that was nice in Venice Film Festival. And this wasn't even after I've watched it a lot after a long time after Venice Film Festival, and it's not even close to be one of my favorite films from that year or that festival in itself. But it's such a beautiful, important, well made, well performed, and just insanely relevant and personal story that it needed more attention. It needed more push from some critics. It needed people to see, and it needed helps from people like us, from other film journalists, to just push it a bit more. And so yeah, it comes to a point where we need to actually think about our own responsibility about why isn't this film more seen? What can I do? And there's some stuff that needs to be done about this film.
Yeah, I don't know how helpful this PSA can be because if you're still listening to this episode, you've likely read the book or maybe even watched the movie. But in case you haven't, first of all, thank you for sticking around for so long. But also, if you're in the US, and a lot of our listeners are from the US and the UK, in the UK, this is streaming exclusively on Mubi. And from what I know, it's the only country where Mubi is screening it, which is a bit of a shame. But in the US, you can watch it on Hulu and AMC Plus. So two fairly big, I guess, screening streaming services. So check it out if you haven't already. And I do believe down the line this will genuinely go down as oh, why didn't people talk about it? And it's the unfortunate thing about festival darlings, because right now we're living in a world where 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days has existed for what, 2007, so it's been over 16 years almost by now.
Yes.
But that film similarly didn't make that much money. It wasn't as well known back then, but through word of mouth, through critics pushing it, through best films of the 2010s, it did end up growing a bit of a following. And I do hope and believe that because of the Venice connection and because of some critics who have supported this from the first moment they saw it, I do think this will have a long lasting life, which is also why, it's not the first book that someone would like to talk about on a book versus film podcast, such as this one. But I did think it was important to kind of shine a spotlight on it. Even if it is not as well known as other books that we've talked about, like Twilight, or the one episodes, like our future episodes that we will have on this show. Raphael, I have one last question for you then. Which one do you like best? Annie Ernaux' book or the film? And I think this is one of the tougher choices
Yeah,
you
because
have.
I don't think it's really fair competition, I would say,
Mm,
because this book is. I mean, I have right now. I'm a bit in love with Ernaux's writing, so I think that might might be something to it, but it's such an intimate way of writing, and so insightful and so beautiful. Yes, sometimes cold, but always beautiful and poignant and self-reflective, that I just can't get away with it. I think the film is wonderful. It's really important, but sometimes we say that a film is important, but yeah, it might not be. It's not in terms sometimes of quality, but just in the terms of the importance of the material in it. But it's actually a super well made, well written, well shot, and well acted film that has an interesting and important message in it. And I really like this film, but I think for me, it is going to be the book.
yeah. I will, to kind of balance things out, I'll pick the film, even though it is just a tight race for both. And I do believe both should be experienced at least once in your life. But, you know, I can see a lot of people, which is a shame, but people don't read anymore. We try to fight that with this
We're trying
podcast,
to correct that.
trying to correct that, but people don't read, sadly. uh, and while happening is it's literally an afternoon read. Like, you pick this book at your local library on a Friday, Saturday afternoon, you can take it off and just read this book. You'll be done before dinner. Trust me. uh, but for those who are a bit more lazy, but also just to maybe even show it in class, or kind of show it to more people, I think the visual medium in this case can help and affect audiences more than by just simply reading it. Even though the book is so powerful, so powerful, I think there's something hypnotic about the film and its rhythm that kind of hooks you in, never lets go until the end. And it's an emotional gut punch that just lands very effectively. So yeah, this is it for this episode of the Death by Adaptation podcast. Raphael, where can our listeners follow you on social media, and where can they read via Google Translate your writing?
So yeah, I write in Portuguese in fiocontutor.com.pt. I have my letterbox at RJR Felix. I think that it's the
Yes,
same for Twitter, where I give some takes. The last few days I've just been annoyed about well, quiet on the Western Front, but yeah,
I dread
those
watching it.
you can find me there.
Yes, lovely, lovely. You can follow me as always at NickGura97 on Twitter and Instagram. There you can find links to everything, Letterboxd, my Clapper reviews, my YouTube videos, and the short films that I make, which actually, by the time this is released, there is kind of a short film that I made kind of adjacent to this. story that's come out, because I'm hoping to release it on February 1st. So you can check out My Choice. It's called on Vimeo and YouTube. And of course, stay tuned. You can follow, of course, this podcast on Twitter and Instagram, respectively, Death Adaptation and Death by Adaptation Pod. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be back in March, brand new month, brand new podcast, where I'll be joined again by you and Gledo to talk about Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs and David Cronenberg. It's gonna be a heavy episode. Lots of homework to do in preparation for that, but it's gonna be fun. Thank you as always for listening. Thank you for sticking with us, and I hope you have a fabulous day. Bye bye.